All right, welcome everybody to this remote interview. In this series, we are interviewing heads of remote to talk about this new position of head of remote. Today on the line, I have Chase Warrington. Chase, you were the head of remote at Doist, and you are now performing more of an operations function. Current head of operations at Doist, based in Germany for now, but traveling all over the place. So that's also interesting. But we're going to talk about head of remote in this podcast. And so I'm going to start with my first question, given that you were the head of remote. What is it? How would you describe head of remote to somebody who was new to this?
Yeah, it's a funny question because it should have a simple answer, right? But the funny thing is when I first got hired as Duis head of remote, I started reaching out to anybody and everybody that had a similar title, connecting on LinkedIn or just making connections with people and realizing that very quickly as I talked to them about their roles that the only thing that we all really had in common was that we didn't have a whole lot in common when it came to what we were doing every day. The role was really is brand new at the time. It's a couple, going back a few years now. And every company that had developed something like this had kind of put their own spin on it. It depended a lot on where you were in the transition. If you were in a transitional phase from a more co-located environment to a distributed environment, or if you were like us, we were already completely remote before the pandemic, but we wanted to up level our approach to doing remote work. And so for me and at Doist, that was really the focus. Was we said, how can we make sure that as this transition is happening and all these new tools and practices are emerging that are supporting remote work, how can we continue to ensure that we do this at a really, really high level? And we'd like to have somebody kind of leading that charge. Another thing for us is that being remote is a remote first organization is sort of our baked into the company's DNA and part of our brand. And we've always been a build in public type company that really wanted to invest in and sharing the way that we were building a remote first team. And so that was a part of the role as well. So my role was really split 50-50 between sort of remote work advocacy and internal remote work operations.
Okay, so spreading the word about how a remote first company was working, but then also trying to better how the company was actually working remotely. So, what did you do when you started?
Well, aside
Well,
from reaching out to all the people out there that are a lot smarter than me and had been doing this for a little while and learning from them, we started grabbing at the low hanging fruits. I mean, we had things in our company infrastructure that were a little bit outdated. It's kind of like having a house that's been around for a long time, but and it looks really good, but you realize like, oh, we've got some little cracks in the infrastructure that could use some remodeling, perhaps to you kind of use that metaphor. So we started looking at like the tools that we were using. The like a great example is like we had built a 1,200 page handbook over years, but it was never really built intentionally with proper tooling and proper guidelines and things like that. It had sort of just been like hacked together and not using an ideal tool, not really putting the right guidelines in place. And so we looked outside. We said, what are other companies doing? Documentation's a key part of having a thriving remote first culture, but we really probably weren't doing it as well as we thought or as well as we could. So we did a full revamp of our handbook, for example, and then we looked at how we connect and how we collaborate with each other offline, when we come together in the physical space and actually have time together in person. And we said, we can do this at a much higher level. We think this is actually really important to making remote first work. So let's rethink how we're doing that. And so anyway, it was just kind of like taking a holistic view and saying like, how have we built this thing and what can we learn from others and improve now that this space has changed so much, and there's so much more available to us to build an even better mousetrap.
so when you say you took a holistic view, how did you do it? Did you use surveys? Did you do retrospectives? I mean, how many people
Mhm.
are in the company at this point?
Yeah, so we've got about 100 people, and our 100 teammates are spread across 35 countries. Again, like remote first, so no offices. Everybody works predominantly asynchronously. And so we to kind of dive into what the pain points people were feeling and the areas for concern. We sent out surveys. We did a lot of uh, quote unquote user interviews, but users being my teammates, and tried to find those pain points and figure out what we could improve for the team. We also looked at a lot of it was really looking outward and hearing from others what they were experiencing. Doist had already been remote first for, let's say, 15 years at this point. And that's really great. We had some awesome experience because of that. But when new teams come along and suddenly make the transition, they discover a lot of things that were probably blind spots for us. So talking to people who were going through the transition of going, we were co-located, now we're fully remote. They're learning a lot and they're seeing a lot of things that we wouldn't have. And so that was a key part of it as well, was like being active in that remote work community and learning from pros who were leading their own teams through their own transitions.
I can imagine. And why why do companies need this?
Well, I mean, if you look at my career path, I guess, I've recently transitioned out of the head of remote role, and so we don't currently have one. And so I guess it would be hypocritical of me to say you need one of these people, but I think what every company that's of any level of distribution now should have, which is, probably most companies at this point. The statistics show us that most companies are distributed on some level. You probably need to have somebody in your organization that's just thinking through how does that affect our workplace. The way that we were trained to operate businesses for centuries now has been somewhat standard, and then we've just had this big shakeup, and all of a sudden there are a lot of new tools available to you. There's a lot of practices. There's a lot of people that you can learn from that are operating businesses super efficiently and ensuring that their employees are having a wonderful experience. And so, if you don't have somebody thinking through that, then I think you're probably missing out on a really big opportunity and perhaps getting left behind as well.
Indeed, a lot of return to office mandates because people are doing it wrong. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, productivity is down. And I mean, yeah, it's the only way to look at it. I mean, and I think some cultures are in-person cultures, and I'm all for that. But I mean, the reality is at some point you're going to be working with people that are distributed. It's just the reality of any company,
Yeah.
right? Is that we
Yeah.
cannot get people back into the toothpaste tube again. But I want to talk a little bit about the responsibilities of the role, because you said there's like an operations side and then there's the advocacy side. I kind of want to focus more on the operations because I think that that's a really interesting part of what our head of remote does. What do you mean then by operations?
Yeah, it's a broad term, right? I question that too. My new role as head of operations is thinking about our operations, and that's quite a lot of things, or it could be. And that was the case with the head of remote role as well. Like 50% of the job description was focused on operations, and on any given day, that could be a lot of things. I collaborated sort of like an internal consultant with a lot of different teams. So, for example, I worked with the finance team when we were looking to adjust the way that we did compensation. We had been using a location factor in our salary formula for many years, and we were rethinking that. And so we thought, this is a part of the remote experience. We have people in 35 countries. How do we think through this? I would work with the people op team on how we were going to do how we're going to optimize onboarding, considering we're in a remote first environment. I again, like looking at tooling and processes, and one of the big things that I now am the DRI for in the current setup is that, like, we have this pretty massive workflow that we call the do system, which is like the way in which we move projects from like an idea to execution and all the steps in between, and the way that we build temporary teams, which we call squads, to to manage those initiatives. And so, you know, optimizing that system. I mean, this is the way that we get work done at Doist, and thinking through all the elements that go into that is part of how we operate. So there's a lot that, on any given day could fall onto my plate. But I think it touches, generally speaking, on like, how does the company get work done? How do we connect? How do we build uh, both things like products and services, but also how do we build relationships and strengthen those relationships that we have internally? All of that, it sort of falls under operations at Doist.
That's a broad role. That is a broad role. So, what would you say are the essential skills for somebody who wants to do this kind of role? I mean, I mean, clearly you need to be good at communication, and probably written communication would be my first guess. But what else?
Yeah, well, you hit the nail on the head with that one. I think you have to have a level of empathy for the reader and the recipients, because you're touching a lot of you're the work that you're doing is influencing a lot of the ways that other people work. And so you need to be very receptive to feedback, sometimes harsh criticism, because when you're trying to serve, let's just say at Doist, which is not a huge company, we're 100 people, but we've got people that are both from culturally diverse backgrounds and also from very diverse backgrounds in terms of their professions. You've got engineers and designers and marketing people and salespeople and managerial types, and people who are just beginning in their careers. And so throw in the fact that we're also from 35 different countries. You have people who look at things very differently.
Mm.
And so when you're affecting the way that those people are going to work or operate or be compensated or connect with others, there's bound to be friction and a difference of opinions. And so you have to be, I think, confident enough to be willing to push forward, to accept the criticism, but also empathetic enough to really care about serving the needs of everyone as best as you possibly can. And then I think there's also a level of like, do you care? I think this is a really hard position to just step into and just kind of do. I think you have to really care about the outcome and really want to set the company on a track towards success. So I've talked with a lot of people who are interested. When the head of remote role came about, there was a lot of people who thought like, oh, this is my dream job. I love remote work. I would love to do what you do. And then, can we chat about it? And when you talk to them, a lot of times you find out that they love remote work, or they love digital nomadism, or they love travel or something like this. But that wasn't really at the core of what the role was about. It was really about optimizing systems and helping teammates thrive. And so I think you really have to care about those things.
Yeah, how do you find people? How do you know if they care? Is there a way can you tell when you're interviewing?
It's a good question. I mean, people are going to put on their best face for an interview. I guess everybody cares in the moment, but I guess, from my perspective, I had already been at Doist for many years, I believe 5 years at that point, and had built out a niche for myself in, um, wanting to make Doist one of the best remote first companies in the world. And so that was a goal of the company that aligned with my personal goals. And so for me, it was a natural fit. But I would actually circle back to the thing that you said as the most important, which is like the communication skills. Like when you're working in a predominantly distributed environment where the written word is super powerful, and the thing that most of us are going to lean on to communicate, and then you're articulating documentation and policies and procedures that impact everyone. That, I think, it is a skill you really want to try to hone. I mean, just in general, those are the type of people that we try to hire. But then, like, as I've progressed throughout my career into this position, it's been a skill that I really try to work at and get better at, because it's more important than ever that my communication is like clear, considerate of everyone else, considerate of all the readers, and as concise as possible, because it's taking up a lot of space in people's inboxes when I share something these days.
Right, right. You have to be careful about how you how you push information out, but also how do you put it out in a way that moves the ball forward, like
Yeah.
every single time. Like, yeah, indeed, there's a whole art to asynchronous communication. And I want to
Yeah.
dive into a little bit, although we're not going to have time to dive in too much. But in terms of in the area of maintaining transparency and visibility, you when you were mentioning your Do It tool, your workflow, how is that visualized? What do you guys use for that?
So I mentioned that we have a, fairly robust handbook. I believe we have something like 30 or 35 pages in the handbook just about the do system. So just explaining everyone's roles, exactly the rituals, the procedures, the tools, how things, move from an idea to being shipped ultimately. And so we have that, well documented there using a lot of
Okay.
multimedia and such. But a thing that really drives it is like we leverage our internal tool, our project management tool, Todoist, which is like a lightweight task management tool that also has a version that's well equipped for teams. And so we use that to drive everything. All of our tasks and projects and such run into Todoist, and so that's really kind of like the lifeline.
I would hope that you would use your own tool, of course,
Yeah.
to manage yourself. That I don't go. I'm not. I wasn't going to ask, but just,
Yeah.
so okay. So you've got your own tool that helps you maintain transparency and visibility. Are there any other tools that for this role of head of remote specifically that you would recommend?
Oh, there's probably a lot. I mean, at the center of all the tools that we use and that I use, are a couple like, red threads, which is like transparency at the core. So everything's accessible in a transparent place. We don't use email at all, for internal communication. All of our communication's done in Twist, another one of our tools, which is sort of like a Slack or Teams alternative. Todoist, where we manage all of our tasks, is accessible to everyone. The whole team can see everybody's public projects, all the squads that are working on whatever it is that they're working on. Everything's accessible. And then all the tools where we do like documentation, or any writing that we're doing, any design that we're doing, everything's public by default. And so those are, we live in the G Suite, so we're using Google Docs and Google Sheets and Calendar and things like that. Again, not really using email much at all. And then, of course, the Zooms and the Fig Jams and whiteboarding tools and such, that I think are somewhat staples for people these days. But yeah, I mean, I don't think there's any like secret sauce there. I think that more importantly than, maybe it's a bit cliche, but like more importantly than the tools is like how you choose to use them. And I've seen people with like really asynchronous tools using them in very synchronous ways, and vice versa. So I think it's just about like, is leadership committed to making this, this function and the functionality of the company work in this new modern way? And if so, are they adopting the right tools and practices to support the team?
I love that. And one of the things that you said is I think transparency at the core and information is public by default. I think those are probably, that's sort of at the core of what you want to think about in terms of the tools that you're using. That's sort of I think for this role.
Yeah,
Where do
I
you
would
go
agree.
for help? Like where did you, when you said you looked to out external sources, who did you look at?
Um, so I mean, I talked to a lot of people, or early on, going back like a couple years ago when I first started in the head of remote role. But there's so individual people. There was a lot of individuals along the way.
Mhm.
But I think a couple places where I've gotten a lot of support are, one, through LinkedIn. So just sharing, I mentioned before, we're a build in public type of company. And I really love this concept because I love sharing what we're doing at Doist, but it's sort of a selfish good deed because I probably get 10x back compared to what I put into it. So I get, by sharing what we're doing, I'm hearing feedback from others out there, and I'm getting to connect with people around the world who are also doing this kind of thing and learning from them. So LinkedIn has really been an incredible resource for me. Like as much as I've tried to share, I'm positive I've gotten a lot more back from it. And then the other thing is like I've gotten involved with the running remote community, which has been really helpful. They have a private Slack community that first of all, going to the events is great and meeting people in person and learning from people there. But then secondly, getting involved in their private Slack community where there's just people sharing, in-depth knowledge of running remote organizations. So yeah, those are two in particular. And then I could rattle off a long list of names, yours included, that I've connected with and learned from over the years that have been a support system for me over the years.
Yeah, indeed. LinkedIn is a remarkable resource in this way.
Yeah.
Uh, so we've only got a couple minutes left. I want to just ask, where would someone look if they wanted to find head of remote jobs? I know you probably haven't looked recently, but if
Yeah,
someone
right.
were looking, like where would you go?
I wonder if I'm the
Yeah.
right person to ask. The funny thing is like when I got hired at Doist, I was searching for remote, companies that would let you work from anywhere in the world. And my wife found this article that was like 72 companies that'll let you work from anywhere in the world. And that seemed like a big number at the time, but now I feel like there's probably, 72 job boards that just focus on on remote work roles. And so I think this is the kind of thing where this particular position is one of those things where it's almost as much who you know as what you know. And I think being involved in the types of communities that we just mentioned are where you're going to find a lot of the forward thinking companies that are actively thinking about hiring someone specific for this. So I would start there. I would start with networking in those spaces, getting involved with the quote unquote remote work community, informal or formal, whatever that is. The running remote community is a great spot again, and then just like reaching out to the people that are leaders in that space and connecting with them and finding out what they know, because I think that's most likely where you're going to find those types of positions. Setting that aside, I think like there's some great job boards out there where you might find something like this. I've really started to like one called JobGether in particular.
Yeah.
It's a great website, and then there's classics like Flex Jobs and We Work Remotely, and so I'd start scouring those boards if this is something that really interests you, and see if you can find something that may not be the title of head of remote, but maybe it's an operations role at a remote first organization, or a company that's going distributed and is looking to hire someone with that type of expertise. Maybe you can carve out your own niche, even if the title isn't exactly what you're looking for.
Right, right. Because operations is also a very big word that encompasses
Sure.
many things. So, yeah, indeed, trying to think a little bit more broadly. All
Yep.
right. Well, we have reached the end of our time today, and I want to respect our boundaries. So, I wanted to thank you so much for spending the time with me and to talk about this head of remote position. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for the great questions, and great to chat with you, and also thank you for all the info you've shared over the years. It's fun to finally get the chance to connect and chat.
Thanks so much. I appreciate that. Appreciate that. All right, everybody. Until next time, be powerful.